new episode of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Oyakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past 2 weeks. We enter Week 10 of the NFL season, and it has been quite a thrower so far. The Atlanta Falcons are sizzling as they are currently the only undefeated team in the NFL with an 8-0 record. But aside from them, the two other hottest teams in the NFL are the Chicago Bears and the Houston Texans, who each have a 7-1 record and will face each other this week. And the biggest surprise has been the Indianapolis Colts, who are 6-3 under the helm of rookie QB Andrew Luck. A lot more football has to be played, but I'm certainly keeping my eyes peeled for what should be an exhilarating season. The 2012-2013 NBA season has officially kicked off, boys and girls. The defending champion Miami Heat is the favorite to be this year's champions for a second consecutive season. They currently have a 5-1 record at the time of this filming. The New York Knicks have been playing stellar basketball since the beginning of this season, playing with a 4-0 record at the time of this episode. Brooklyn basketball has also been born as the Nets have officially began playing in the brand new state-of-the-art Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. And the most alarming headline in the NBA has involved the Los Angeles Lakers, who began the season with a 1-4 record. This abysmal record, despite acquiring Steve Nash and Dwight Howard over the offseason, has led to the firing of head coach Mike Brown. While weeks 1 and 2 are complete in the NBA, it should be interesting to see how the NBA season pans out in the weeks and months ahead. The MLB offseason is underway, and of course, the rumor mill is spinning wildly. One of the biggest free agents heading into this offseason is slugger Josh Hamilton, who has spent the last 5 years with the Texas Rangers. It is likely that Hamilton will land a huge deal, but the question is whether he'll go to another team or stay in Texas. Another big name and relevant free agent is Rafael Soriano, who did a superb job closing games for the Yankees when Mariano Rivera went down with an injury. There is speculation as to whether or not Mariano will be coming back, but if not, the Yankees hope to bring Soriano back in pinstripes. And finally, the Mets are currently in talks with National League Cy Young favorite R.A. Dickey to keep him in orange and blue. While Dickey is not a free agent, the Mets are looking into keeping Dickey under a long-term deal. The question is how long they'll lock up Dickey and for how much. Also, congrats to the World Series champion, San Francisco Giants. Whoop whoop! Today's Order in the Court will discuss the recent marijuana legislation that was passed earlier this week in Washington and Colorado. If you're a U.S. citizen and are over the age of 18, I hope you performed your civic duty and voted in this year's election. And if you were in the state of Washington or Colorado, then you had an additional task to not only vote for your choice for president, but you voted on marijuana legislation that was proposed in both states. The legislation was passed allowing the recreational use of marijuana in each state. There is discussion going on regarding the federal government intervening and potentially shooting down this legislation. Nevertheless, it made me think, even if the federal government couldn't shoot down this marijuana legislation, how could this legislation affect athletes who reside in or visit the states of Washington and Colorado? After all, are the players bound by the express word of their sports drug testing policy, or does this legislation allow players the opportunity to freely use marijuana? In today's episode, I'll discuss this marijuana legislation proposed in Colorado and Washington and how this legislation could affect players who play in a sport that has an active drug testing policy. First, let's take a brief look at the marijuana legislation that was voted on and passed in Washington and Colorado. According to CNN.com, Amendment 64 in Colorado will amend the state constitution to legalize and regulate the production, possession, and distribution of marijuana for persons aged 21 and older. Meanwhile, in Washington, according to CNN.com, the state passed the marijuana legislation in an effort to raise tax revenue. Initiative 502 will legalize and regulate the production, possession, and distribution of cannabis for persons aged 21 and older. However, there is already talk that the federal government will attempt to quash these state statutes under the principle in constitutional law known as federal preemption. The United States Constitution, under this principle, grants the federal government the authority to invalidate any state law that conflicts with federal law. The Supremacy Clause found in Article 6, Clause 2 states the following: This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. the federal government would have a valid argument to invalidate the Washington and Colorado laws allowing the recreational use of marijuana. I won't go into too much depth since it would be a relatively long argument. However, it's likely that the federal government would use 21 U.S.C. 841 as grounds to invalidate the recreational use of marijuana in Washington and Colorado. 21 U.S.C. Section 841 is a federal law that bans the manufacturing, distribution, or possession of a controlled substance, which includes 1,000 kilograms or more of a mixture or substance containing a detectable amount of marijuana, or 1,000 or more marijuana plants, regardless of weight. Bringing this legislation back to the subject of sports, let's suppose an athlete plays for a team located in Washington or Colorado, or lives in or visits these states during the season or off-season. Whether or not the federal government can successfully invalidate the marijuana legislation passed in Washington and Colorado is irrelevant. This is because, according to most, if not all league drug testing policies that I have researched, players are bound to the terms of the policy as long as that player is a member of a sports organization or a league. For example, in the National Football League's substance abuse policy, which you can view by clicking the link below this video, under the heading titled General Policy, it states that it applies to all players who have not retired from the NFL. It also states in relevant part the following: this policy and its terms shall be binding on all NFL clubs and shall constitute the sole and exclusive means by which players will be tested or referred for treatment, and as to those players having problems with substances of abuse, the sole and exclusive means by which they will gain access to the benefits of this policy. The policy goes on to list a series of drugs prohibited by the NFL, one of which includes marijuana. Even in Major League Baseball's drug testing policy, it states in the preamble of the policy that the drug testing program applies to all players who are members of a Major League Baseball club's 40-man roster. And in Section 2 of the policy, one of the banned substances listed in black and white that is prohibited from use in Major League Baseball is marijuana. The list can go on, but having said all of this, because of the express language laid out in drug testing or substance abuse policies like we have seen in the NFL and Major League Baseball, even if marijuana legislation is upheld in Colorado and Washington, it is likely that athletes living in or visiting these states would still be bound to the written word of their league's drug policies and would likely still be prohibited from using marijuana. Before I wrap up today's episode, you are well aware that last week, much of the East Coast was ravaged as a result of Hurricane Sandy, leading to the destruction of thousands of homes and loss of life. Portions of New Jersey and New York were hit the hardest, and recovery has already begun in these areas. If you would like to help those who are recovering from the affliction suffered by Sandy, I'll leave a link below this video that will take you to a list of reputable charities that are helping those in dire need. And thank you in advance for your contributions. Anyway, that's the show. Leave all your comments down below and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Take care, guys.